Why hello everybody, take a trip back in time with me to 1903, Lower East Side, to discuss one of the craziest scenes in the early 1900s, Lower Manhattan. We're going to be covering the infamous wild scene that was the Rivington Street Shootout, September 16th, 1903. Now, Monk Eastman was born Edward Monk Eastman. Monk is short for monkey because that's what the people around him said he looked like. Was born in 1875. We do not have a day. I've looked. In Corlear's Hook, Lower Manhattan. Fun fact about this neighborhood, which technically does not exist anymore. The term hooker actually was coined here, or at least that's what the legend says. And I mean, I guess it makes sense. Corlear's Hook, and it was notorious for ladies of the night, we'll say. Now, young Edward Monk Eastman was born to Samuel Eastman and Mary Eastman. There's some dispute over his ethnicity. If you watch a lot of documentaries, they'll describe him as a Jewish American, but from my research, I'm thinking he was an Englishman. That's where it seems that his ancestry lies. So I'm going to say he was most likely of English descent. He just was the leader of a gang that had a lot of Jewish members. Now, young Monk and his family was abandoned by age 5 by his father. So him and his mother moved up to the Upper East Side with their grandfather. And his grandfather would basically keep him on a straight path, set him up with a pet shop where Monk actually developed a real fascination with birds that he actually kept throughout his life. But his villain arc story starts right when his grandfather dies. After that is where we have his first documented arrest. As a young Monk would make his name in the criminal underworld, which was not organized crime yet. During this time, this was the gangs of New York time period. Lots of huge gangs running wild, causing havoc throughout the street, being reckless. He created his own gang called the Eastmans. They ran brothels, protection rackets, drugs, the whole thing through the Lower East Side. And they had a couple rivals. Obviously, if you're a gang, you need a gang to war against. Now, the two gangs that the Eastmans had the most friction with were the Yos, an Irish gang, and the 5 Points gang that started out as an Irish gang, but later on involved a lot of Italians and even some Jews. Now, the Yos, they kind of died out earlier than the other two. They were led by a bunch of different people. Now, as far as the Yos are concerned, during my research, I found something that I thought was pretty funny, which was an actual price list for their services. Stabbing, beatings, the big job, and the prices that go along with those services. They found this on a member named Piker Ryan. Full disclosure, I could not find this guy. This could very well be a newspaper writer sensationalizing the gangs to sell papers. But nonetheless, it's pretty funny and wouldn't be surprised if it was true. Now, their main rival that they had the most friction with were definitely the 5 Points gang. Now, this gang started off Irish, as I said earlier, but during this time period, we could say that the leading players, the top brass, were Italians, but they still had a large representation of Irish and even some Jewish people in there as well, led by another infamous and notorious gang figure and leader of that time period, Paul Kelly. I know that sounds like an Irishman's name, but it wasn't. He changed it for more acceptance in this new country. He was actually born Francesco Paolo Antonio Vaccarelli. He was an Italian gang member and leader. Now, before becoming the leader of this gang, he was actually an accomplished boxer, very skilled with his hands. Now, when you want to talk about the roster he had under him, oh boy, you had a lot of Hall of Famers. You had Johnny Torrio, Al Capone, Meyer Lansky, Frankie Yale, Lucky Luciano. These are guys that would all make an impact later on when it comes to criminality in New York City. These were like the top guys. They made their name and made their mark. That being said, obviously being rivals, there's a lot of back and forths, robberies, murders, and these are two huge gangs. The 5 Points gang was rumored to have about 1,500 soldiers, and the Eastmans had about 1,200 estimated, which leads us to the night of September 16th, 1903, a night that would shake New York City up. Funny enough, it was election day, and actually there was a ceasefire called by Tammany Hall for the gangs to chill out. And if you don't know what Tammany Hall was, do your Googles, because it was one of, if not the most corrupt organization to ever be in New York City. Now, after a hard, long day of voter intimidation and voter fraud, later on that night, they went back to their normal routine. You know, gambling, fighting, robbery, all the normal stuff. Now, according to the newspapers back in those days, this crazy scene started out on 1st Avenue and 1st Street when a man named Anton Bernhauer was actually shot through his cheeks after an altercation inside the saloon that they were in. Sounds like the stuff that happens today. An altercation starts over the smallest thing and someone pulls out a gun. As you can see, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, allegedly, some Eastmans roaming the streets saw the 5 Points gang in about equal number. It wasn't too many people at this point, about 5 or 6, and it was on sight. They seen each other, weapons get drawn, stuff gets to happening. Now, as the night goes on, we're talking about 100 gang members around midnight. They're fighting under the tracks. It's absolute mayhem. Monk Eastman, at one point during the night, actually shows up and, like an army general, starts pointing his troops in different directions, telling them who to hit, what to shoot, who to go after next. The scene was so crazy. There were people from rooftops throwing bricks down at officers after they showed up to try and squash all this mayhem and violence. As you can see from the highlighted map, this stretched for 2 city blocks. Mayhem, shooting, blunt weapons, all kinds of stuff, knives, for a good 4 or 5 hour stretch. Now, as far as the aftermath goes, one person died and another person was in critical condition. I couldn't find any information on who died, but a lot of people called this huge battle a draw, which is crazy after all that time. Only one person passed. They were like the stormtroopers, I guess, just shooting and missing. And Tammany Hall was obviously pressured by the public to get their gangs under control, so they actually, which is crazy, called for a boxing match between Paul Kelly, or better known as Francesco Vaccarelli, and Edward Monk Eastman. They had a boxing match to put an end to their violence, and guess what? That was deemed a draw. So basically, after that boxing match, things carried on. They was out here wilding, shooting, stabbing, fighting each other on sight. Now, later on, Monk Eastman would actually serve in World War I and would serve dutifully. He was very well respected when it came to the military. Now, after coming back to New York City, what do you think Monk did? He went right back to his old ways. Now, on the morning of December 26, 1920, Eastman and a corrupt prohibition agent named Jerry Bohan at the Bluebird Cafe in Lower Manhattan, about 4 a.m., they were arguing over their dirty money, and Bohan left. Eastman allegedly follows him, calls him a rat, tempers raise, flare up, and Bohan pulled out a pistol and shot him a couple times, putting an end to him. Now, our dear old friend, Monk Eastman, was laid to rest December 31st, 1920. To a mixed crowd, we'll say. 4,000 mourners, a lot of people from New York City looked at him with disdain, and rightfully so. He committed a lot of crimes, killed people, had people killed and beat up and robbed and extorted in the whole nine. But he was actually a celebrated war hero. When he was out there, he served dutifully for this country, and his compatriots in the armed forces held him in high regard and actually would not allow newspapers, or did their best to have newspapers not speak so negatively of him. Now, our buddy Bohan, the corrupt cop Jerry Bohan, this actually shows the sign of the times. Crooked cop, murders a guy, only gets 3 years. Back then, murders, gun possession, you got a fraction of the time. People would not believe it nowadays. But yeah, so he got basically a slap on the wrist, 3 years, killed a man, got out. Monk Eastman, gone forever. But yeah, that's the end of the story.